FORA.tv. The world is thinking.
So I want to talk about some of the psychological studies that I looked at. One famous one occurred in 1967 where a group of researchers brought people into a room and they played them audio broadcasts, spoken word audio broadcasts that covered a variety of topics: politics, religion, and crucially, smoking. This was important because, well, let me actually also say that the audio broadcasts that they played, there was something funny about them. They were kind of filled with static, so you couldn't really listen to it very clearly unless you pressed a button that was mounted in the room. And if you pressed the button, you got a few seconds of kind of crystal clear audio. So the researchers wanted to see when people would press this button, what they were interested in, and what they ignored. So one of the broadcasts had to do with the link between smoking and cancer, and they found that when they played this tape for people who were smokers, people who didn't want to hear very much about the link between smoking and cancer, these people really didn't press the button at all. Meanwhile, people who were non-smokers, when they heard this, they kind of wanted to corroborate their idea. They wanted, support for their habit of not smoking, and they pressed the button a lot when the broadcast supported the link between smoking and cancer. On the other hand, when the researchers played audio tape that kind of discounted the link between smoking and cancer, it was the smokers who pressed the button to listen to a closer, to get clarity on it, and the non-smokers who ignored it. This was one of the first studies that highlighted this view called selective exposure. And basically what it says is that when you're presented with facts that are dissonant, that kind of contradict your view of reality or your passionate beliefs, you tend to avoid these facts, and instead you seek out information that you agree with. In the book, I talk about a real-world example where we saw this really manifest itself, and it was in 2004 with a group we all remember, the Swift Boat Veterans for Truth. Now, there's this idea that the Swift Boat Veterans for Truth were this kind of well-funded group right at the start that was tied to Karl Rove, and they came out and they ruined everything for John Kerry. But actually, if you look at them, they started in May 2004, and they held a press conference at the National Press Club, and they invited reporters from all over town to come, and reporters did come, newspapers, the networks, and the Swift Boat Veterans for Truth, made their pitch about how John Kerry had acted dishonorably in Vietnam, and he didn't earn his medals, and he was a liar. And if you looked in the newspapers or watched TV the next day, there was no coverage of this group because reporters, rightly, ignored them because they didn't have any evidence to back up their claims. So what the Swift Boat Veterans did was they didn't have very much money, and they decided that they would go to an audience that was receptive to their views. And for them, there was this huge audience out there on talk radio. So they went to hundreds of right-wing talk radio stations. Before, I bet any of the people in this room heard of them, they were all over the country on these right-wing talk radio stations, pushing and pushing and pushing their view that John Kerry didn't act honorably in Iraq, that he lied and everything like that. And because of this, they got a huge number of followers. People were going to their website and getting videos of the Swift Boat people talking about their ideas and passing them to right-wing blogs, which were writing about them, and sites like the Drudge Report. And this got them two things. It got them money from donors, and it got them attention from cable news outlets, especially Fox, which started covering them. And then eventually they had enough money to run a few ads, which got all over, and that's sort of how they broke out. Two things to notice about this. First, if this was a decade ago or 2 decades ago, they wouldn't have that group wouldn't have gone anywhere because there was no other outlet for them. After they had been sort of ignored by the media, there would have been nowhere else for them to go. This time they had an alternative way to get into the the public consciousness. The other thing is, once they were all over, and when mainstream news started covering them, and the New York Times and the Washington Post and factcheck.org kind of went through point by point and pointed out why what they were saying was false, the debunking had no effect at all on this campaign, which is kind of fascinating because, if you were interested in what was going on, if you were interested in their campaign, all you had to do was do a Google search and you would find all of the documentation for why they were wrong. What was happening, though, was just like the smokers in that study, people who were kind of most apt to believe this weren't looking for facts weren't looking for evidence about why the Swift boat people were lying. Instead, if you were someone on the right at that point, you were, watching Fox News, and you were listening to Rush Limbaugh, and you were reading your right-wing blogs, and you were getting this kind of, all of the people around you were saying that this was true, and you weren't getting views that were contradictory to this at all. You weren't getting these other facts because they just weren't sort of filtering into this right-wing echo chamber. And that's how it took off. I think that these days it's much harder to debunk things that aren't true. And I should say, I don't only focus on people on the right. There's lots of left-wing ideas that are wrong. There's lots of things that are believed by people on both the left and the right that are wrong, like the autism vaccine link. But so when things are false these days, when people are propagating things that are lies, it's much harder to debunk it because the truth sort of doesn't get into those networks.